At Odds and Ends by Corndog_Patrol and For the Wolfie on AO3. Chapter 24 The Caged Birds Sing. Hizashi had been a natural at delighting the questions asked by the many vamps, but Shouta had felt claustrophobic the entire night, surrounded by the bloodsuckers, sneaking away while Hisashi had been miled away through answering some questions about music had been such a relief on him. Despite the intensity of the situation and the urge to look back at the blonde, slipping past the loitering guards had been easier than expected, since they were too busy surveying the crowds to notice him hurry by into a long, ordained corridor. Doors crowded the walls, but they were best ignored, unless he needed somewhere to hide. He and Emmy had found old blueprints of the building when they have been planning to infiltrate the mayor. The most likely place his daughter was being kept would be the basement. Shota hurried through the halls, sensing pled for the first sight of movement. When he was about halfway through, he stopped. He heard voices in the distance, low but growing closer. He spun and darted through the closest door, closing it soundlessly behind him. The room was dark and void of sound, an unused guest room, according to his mental map. He pressed his ear to the door and waited, breath held deep in his throat, for the voices to pass. However, Shota recognized one of the voices. They had been moved, said Chronostasis, just beyond the wooden barrier. So there's nothing to worry about. We'll capture the Ozawa in no time. Shota's blood felt like ice at the mention of his last name, although he refused to let that throw him. They've been moved. That could only be Eri. Damn it! They had known he was coming. There was only one way Shota was going to get answers. He listened to the sound of the footsteps outside, but it only sounded like there were two of them, including the mask-wearing thug. Shota waited until they were just beyond his door, before he opened it quickly. The duo had their backs to him, but their bodies were already turning towards the sound of the door. Shota had to be quick. He sprung for the one that wasn't chronostasis, knocking them to the floor. There was a crunching sound on impact, but Shota had no time to worry about the life of a vamp. They'll heal up anyways. He lunged for chronostasis in one fluid movement. Two tentacles reached him, but Shota's quirk was quicker. The tentacles paused, inches from him, and then retreated back into the villain's fridge like cowering dogs. Chronostasis was pinned to the wall, the silver shallow endpoint already poised at his throat. Shota's eyes were burning. Where is she? He growled, pressing the tip of the silver against the unmarked skin beneath the mask. Chronostasis was unsurprisingly calm. He was Overhaul's right-hand man for a reason. Shota Aizawa, you looked lost. Aizawa bared his teeth in anger. Don't play games with me. Show me where Eri is, or I won't hesitate to end you now. Even the vampire slayer wasn't sure if he was bluffing. Thanks to Overhaul's connection, none of his cronies were on approved killable vamp list. If Shota killed Kronos, he'd face a far worse punishment than having his license temporarily revoked. Chronostasia's face was hidden beneath his mask, expression unreadable. However, after what felt like an eternity, thanks in part to Shota's inability to blink, the villain nodded. Right this way, Mr. Aizawa. Shota slowly released him, but kept the silver point at the ready, in case of an attack. Chronostasius didn't rush as he pulled himself from the wall, dusting off his clothes, and he turned through the hallway. Shota watched him warily, but the man didn't lash out or try to run away. Chronostasius stared down the hallway, away from the party, carelessly stepping over his unconscious companion. Put him in one of the rooms, Shouta ordered, causing the man to stop. Of course. Chronostatius calmly opened the closest door, another unused bedroom, and pushed the body of his comrade inside. They would wake up in a few hours, although it would be best if no one discovers them until then. Your daughter is this way. No tricks, Shouta warned. No tricks. Chronostatius resumed his walk towards the depths of the mare, the candlelight of the hallway, throwing their shadows across the floor. Shota's eyes burned from unblinking, but he held them open for as long as he humanly could. When he did have to blink, he made sure it was quick, and that there was no chance Chronostatius had noticed. Shouta must have been successful, for the villain didn't even slow, and the arrows of his right didn't lash towards him. However, he didn't let himself relax even for a moment. Instead of going into the basement, no doubt where the ambush lay, Shouta was led up 2 flights of stairs and across several more hallways. The place was void of guards, thanks to the party. It was sloppy of Overhaul to leave his place so unattended, but perhaps the majority were waiting to ambush him. They finally reached a doorway that looked no different from the rest. No guards? Shouta asked. He wanted to look around more, but he kept his eyes pinned on Chronostatius the entire time. If there were guards, people would know something valuable was inside. Chronostatius answered it, simply, and shrugged his shoulders, as if that was obvious. Open it. The vamp obeyed. A sense of wrongness overcame Shouta. This was far too easy. Even with his life on the line, Chronostatius shouldn't have been this disloyal to Overhaul. The door clicked open. The vamp stepped to the side. The room beyond was dark. Shouta didn't move. He called, hoping to get some response from within. His heart was racing with fear, and dread making his skin clampy. Was he going to fail, after all of this? Daddy? The voice was unmistakable. It was airy. She was alive, and she was just beyond the open doorway. Shouta was so close. He moved in a flash, before Chronostatius could react. In a second, the vamp's face was in his hand, and his head was slammed into the wall. As soon as he released him, the villain crumbled to the floor. Shouta cancelled his erasure, but waited for a moment to see if Chronostatius was really unconscious. He didn't move. If he hadn't been so close to Aerie, Shouta might have taken the time to properly check. But time was short, as was his patience. Without looking back, Shouta dashed into the darkness. It took a moment for his eyes to adjust to the gloom. Aerie? He called, quieter than before. Daddy! It was her voice, but there was a weird quality to it. Are you hurt? He asked, voice even louder. Did he hurt you? Shouta followed the direction of the voice. He could start to see outlines in the dark. There was a cage with 2 figures inside. 2. Are you okay? She asked, voice resonating from the cage. There was an echo just beneath the sound, as if someone else was also saying the exact same lines. One of the figures was small, with familiar flowing hair. Harry. Yes, Shouta said, full of relief. I'm fine. His relief was short-lived. Shota's body completely froze, but this time it wasn't from fear. He tried to move, but a force wrapped around his limbs and held him there, like a puppet on tight strings. For a moment, he thought Chronostatius had woken, but then his vision finally cleared, and he could see inside the cage. One of the figures, definitely Aerie. She looked small and thin, hopeful and terrified, tears streaming down her face from her large red eyes. Her mouth was covered by someone's hand. The other person was... It was another child. A boy. He was older than Aerie, a teenager, although he looked just as thin as her. His violet hair was wild, and his eyes reminded Shouta of a cornered animal. At his side was a strange device with a large funnel-like contraption. It reminded him of a gramophone. With one hand, he covered Aries' mouth, and the other, he held a small crank attached to the device. The teenager's shoulders relaxed, as if he had accomplished his goal, and he finally released Erie. She grabbed the boy's arm and shook him, tears running down. Toshi, stop it! Her voice was so loud in the quiet room, despite the muffled sobs that broke out each word. I told you he'd come. He's here to save us. Hitoshi looked pained, but wasn't swayed. I'm sorry. When the teenager next spoke, his voice crackled with power. Sleep. The last sight Shouta saw was Aries' tormented face, soaked with dread, before the darkness rushed to greet him. Hisashi found himself in an oriented study that was clearly more for show than utility. There was a dark, melancholy desk, although it was clear of papers, and the decorations were ornaments and guards, suits of samurai armor, stone vases as large as a child, branching peacock feathers, and all finalized with curtains that shimmered in the burning candlelight. On the wall was the head of a bear, Termax, so that it was face was frozen in a up and roar. Despite his best efforts, the room was still less intimidating than its owner. At the center of the study were two chased lounges, with wooden that matched the desk and multiple neat shelves. The fabric was ivory white, and was so clean it looked like as if it had never been used before. In fact, everything in the room was critically cleaned. It must have been hell for the cleaners, but they did their job well. Hisashi couldn't spy a single piece of dust anywhere. Overhaul sat down on the far lounge, settling like a bird on its perch, and then he gestured at the other. Please sit. Hisashi didn't dare deny him. He sat down and tried to lighten the mood by smiling and saying, This feels like an interview. I'll be blunt, Mr. Yamada. I lied about wanting to discuss your payment. Overhaul scratched the back of his head, looking somehow sheepish. This is embarrassing. What we really need to discuss is your donor. Hisashi swallowed. Fuck. Shouta, he was super excited about coming here tonight. He felt really special with the invitation, how you announced for him as well, and he wanted to play some music with me to show his gratitude. Overhaul politely waited for him to finish before he said, He's a lie. There it was. Overhaul knew who Shouta was. How could he have possibly known? However, by the sound of it, the vampire didn't know whether Hisashi knew or not. Pardon? Hisashi asked, bridling confusion. I don't mean to alarm you, but your donor is a crazy ex-vampire slayer, who was removed from duty for wild accusations. You must be aware of Eraserhead. I heard of the name once or twice, he said, which wasn't exactly a lie. He had been unaware of him until recently. I don't tend to keep track of slayers. That surprises me, Overhaul said. When he spoke, he applied lengthy pauses between each word, as if each one was a carefully laid trap, just waiting to be sprung. Considering your adopted father, after all. That time, Hisashi didn't need to act when he looked confused. His relationship with All Might wasn't supposed to be public information. You've done your research about me, he said with a strained smile. I've been interested in you for a while. Those words sent a chill across his skin. It's how I knew I could reason with you. You're a very smart man, after all. Your blood bag is currently crawling somewhere in my mare, like a rat. But my men will capture him and alert the proper channels of his betrayal. He's a pest that will soon be exterminated. I'd wish to talk to him once he's captured? Hisashi was walking on eggshells with every word, trying to avoid whatever minefield the creep had set up. Even if he had lied, he still falls under my responsibility, so I should be the one to bring him in. Besides, if they'd given me a faulty donor, I'd expect compensation, and for that, I'll need him as evidence. There was a silence. Overhaul watched him like an unmoving hawk. It wasn't an answer he'd wanted to hear, but it also wasn't an answer that revealed whether Hisashi knew. They were interrupted by a knock on the door. Overhaul's eyes didn't stray from Hisashi, although he calmly called, "Come in." It opened and a henchman stood in the doorway, face half obscured by another bird mask. They didn't even look at Hisashi, and that was a bad sign. Eraserhead has taken the bait, sir. Chronosis is leading him as we speak. Without thinking, Hisashi stood up. Shouta was in danger. He was in a trap. Hisashi had to do something. However, his legs refused to move. Overhaul stared him down, and something unsettled solidified in his eyes. "There we go," the man said with a sigh. "You mustn't wear your heart on your sleeve, Mr. Yamada. It can be quite detrimental." Overhaul leaned forward on the sofa and gestured at him. "Please, sit." Hisashi's mouth pulled and quivered as he fought a scowl, as he tried to think about how he'd escape to warn Shouta. Two more henchmen stepped into the door. Sweat rolled down Hisashi's cheek, and he swallowed. But he had no choice to sit back down. Overhaul relaxed and leaned back again. "You know, you've given me quite a lot of trouble over the years, although I'm sure you failed to realize just how much." Hisashi stared at the vampire, eyebrows lowering in a frown. What was he talking about? Years? Shouta had only been with him for 2 weeks. Overhaul spied the confusion on his face. His eyes narrowed, as if he was zooming in on him, and then something changed. "I'm surprised no one realized just who you are. You might have her hair, but your eyes are all him." Hisashi jolted upright, as if lightning had pierced his body. A sense of overwhelming panic lit inside him, bringing into question everything he knew. Him. How did Overhaul know him? However, Hisashi tried to keep his voice composed as he carefully said, "Polite socialties. Remember names better than faces." The comment earned a pause, as if the vampire was considering the answer, before he said, "Your father would have said the same thing." "I am nothing like my father!" Hisashi involuntarily snapped. It was a mistake, but he couldn't control the anger that coursed through him with that comparison. "My father was a monster." Overhaul shook his head, as if Hisashi was nothing more than a tantrum-throwing child. "Don't you ever get tired of spouting that line. He always went on about you and your mother. It got rather tenderous." For just a moment, Hisashi was reminded of the image he typically saw when he played his violin, his mother and father smiling lovingly. However, Hisashi didn't want to think about that right now. He already wasted too many years of his life coming to terms with the contradictory that was his father, a man who always seemed kind and doting, who had turned into a monster, wanted him dead. No, now he had to focus on Overhaul, for Shota's sake. "I'm not surprised you knew him," Hisashi said, trying to brush him off. Everyone knew him. Overhaul was far older than he looked. It's probably related to his quirk. "Eraserhead's a hybrid." It wasn't a question, although it was off topic. "Although his blood has an interesting quality. I'm sure you're very much aware of that fact." Hisashi remained silent. Where was the vampire going with all this? Overhaul sighed. It takes such a long time for humans to develop powers in their bloodlines. But did you know with hybrids, these powers can be triggered? There was a pregnant pause. Hisashi didn't like where this was going, but his mouth felt uncomfortably dry. I've done it several times, Overhaul continued. However, there's one issue with this. It's as if their quirk and their blood blend, meaning their blood's power mimics their quirk. It's a real shame that I've never been able to trigger others' powers. His eyes stared immensely at Hisashi, burrowing into his soul, and the next words he said made his entire world stop. Especially since your father did. There it was. For a moment, another memory from before entered Hisashi's mind, of his father discussing one of his patients. Mr. Aizawa had erasure. His father had many patients, and yet the family he chose to destroy on that day had been Hisashi's and Shota's. Once Shouta had told him he hadn't realized his blood had posed any powers, especially since it had never appeared in his family line before. Somehow, the aphrodisiac quality of Shota's blood had been triggered, even though his quirk was completely different. That's why. That was the connection between the Yamadas and the Aizawas. Shouta was an experiment of his father's. Shouta was a successful experiment. Hisashi looked up, only now realizing his mistake. Overhaul's invitation hadn't been challenged. He wanted Shouta to come to the mayor. You worked with my father, Hisashi whispered, his mouth dry. Not exactly, Overhaul dismissed, wavering a gloved hand. We're more like business rivals. He rubbled his success in my face, and, well, I just had to get rid of the competition. A lump formed in Hisashi's chest. The Termac's head on the wall loomed over him. The fire from the hearth flickered in Overhaul's eager eyes. He looked like a demon. You're lying, Hisashi said, smiling with disbelief. His father was a monster. Overhaul hadn't done that. His father had chosen to drain the Aizawas dry, except for Shouta, and then had gone to Hisashi's home and had killed his mother and tried to kill him too. He shot Hisashi. If the bullet had only been an inch over, then he would have... An inch over. As I said before, Overhaul continued, voice echoing in his mask. I've perfected the art of triggering quirk-related powers in a patient's blood. I got hold of a very interesting AB blood type. It's called brainwashing. Anyone who drinks it has to do anything I order. Brainwashing. AB blood type. No, 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 no. He didn't mean I'd got rid of the competition, Overhaul repeated. And what better way to do than by also ruining his reputation? I saw she was going to be sick. The bullet had missed his heart by an inch. He remembered his father's eyes. They had been like a beast, savage, and yet they had still been his father's eyes. No, Hisashi whispered. I was lucky your blood type was an AB. Although all vampire turning feral is such a reputable cover-up. However, you were supposed to die as well. Eyes narrowing. Not only that, but you were adopted by All Might, the last person I wanted to mess with. You threw a wrench in my plans. You're talkative today, Hisashi forced out, each syllable quaking. "I'm venting," he said with a shrug. "You won't be able to tell anyone this, so there's no harm." Of course, Overhaul was only telling him this because he didn't plan to let Hizashi go. "I was expecting to buy your mare once your family was dead, and the bank put it for auction. It would have been easy, and no one would have suspected." "The lab," Hisashi said, as the dots joined together in his mind. "You want to know how he did it?" "Yes. I tried to get Aizawa, but my henchmen couldn't find him in the rubble, and presumed he died too. Despite my careful calculations to your father, that lab is my last key to success. And I'm done with you standing in my way. You should have just married one of those suitors I sent your way." It felt offhanded, but there was something venomous in his tone. "Your death would have been far more peaceful. Muscular." That was who had told Overhaul about Shouta. He must have seen Shouta when Tensei had once mentioned that Muscular had visited when Hisashi hadn't been home. Had he seen Shouta then? Muscular had worked for Overhaul from the very beginning. It explained why he tried to kill him after Hisashi had turned him down. He'd still been trying to finish his job. "Why is it so important?" Hisashi asked, although he already felt hollowed out. He had to buy a bit more time before Overhaul grew sick of him. Maybe Shouta could overpower the henchmen and get through whatever trap was placed? Maybe Hisashi could live just long enough for his family to save them? To have hybrids with duplicated powers in their blood. The question was enough to earn another Flux laugh from the vampire. "Your donor has an aphrodisiac running through his veins. Can you even imagine how much money I'll make from selling him? But why stop there, when I could duplicate the power into thousands of hybrids? Why stop at aphrodisiac? All I need to do is get my hands on some promising bloodlines and some pathetic hybrids, and I'll have enough money and power to own the world." Hisashi shuddered. He had to rescue Aizawa. He should have never brought him here. "But, Mr. Yamada," Overhaul said, with finally, as he gestured at the guard, "I suppose this is it." Hisashi stood and tried to evacuate the hands of the guards, but was stopped when stone encircled his feet and kept him from moving. Overhaul's quirk? The guards grabbed him, and the tiles turned to normal. "Once you're dead, I'll be able to purchase your estate, although I'll have to make your death look like a tragic accident to avoid All Might's wrath." Something was forced into Hisashi's mouth. He struggled against it, tried to spit it out, but it punctured by his veins. Hot blood drowned his tongue. He resisted the urge to swallow and struggled all he could against the two guards, but the blood leaked down his windpipe instead. He stuttered, and in his panic, he swallowed the liquid. "Goodbye, Mr. Yamada," Overhaul said. Hisashi's vision grew spotty, first from tears and then from something else. Despite the blood, a sudden, unquenchable hunger rooted itself in his gut. Overhaul sat back on the white chase and clapped his hands together, even as the world turned into a fury red. "I hope you'll be just as entertaining as your father." So, how are we liking the chapter so far? We saw Hitoshi! Shinso's here! Yay! Any predictions for what's gonna happen? I really don't have much notes other than the whole big reveal of, Hisashi's father and how he didn't actually, he wasn't actually a monster, he was framed. He was framed. He didn't mean to do all of that. He literally was forced into all of that. literally unwillingly. Like, it's not even just like blackmail. No, like literally he had no control over his body. Like, ugh, that's such a hassle. And all of this for freaking Aizawa. Oh my god, it all comes together. The whole world is tied together. And this makes me think, if Overhaul never did this and everything stayed the same, you know what just hit my mind when I first read this? What hit my mind is, wait, hold up. If the Aizawas and Yamadas were in good terms and talking, it could have well been at one point that they became family friends. Meaning, Hizashi and Aizawa would have become friends from childhood. They would have been childhood friends. And they wouldn't have to go through all this torment. And they could have gotten together sooner, and there wouldn't have been any angst. But of course, Overhaul had to be a little fucking whore. Anyways, as I was saying, I hate Overhaul. Everybody, we hate Overhaul. We hate Overhaul. Anyways, I wonder what's gonna happen next. Because, you know, like, Hisashi's gone feral now. So, like, what's gonna happen? Hisashi's gone feral. Shouta is very much passed out. Hitoshi, for some reason, is helping out Overhaul. I wonder what that's about. As always, my raindrops, make sure to eat, sleep, drink water, take your meds. Have a wonderful day or night. Link to my Discord server and socials are down in the description. Subscribe to see more of my content, and thank you so much for watching.